As Pekka announced at this past Robocon, we have reached the 15th year anniversary of Robot Framework being open sourced and shared with a wider community. With this milestone, I started to think about where we have been, where we currently are, and what would the next 15 years be like. To look at this picture of the past, present, and future, I want to work through some questions that will help us walk through this timeline. Some questions like, how can one contribute? What are the channels for outreach? Or, how did I come into the community? That seems like a good place to start. But before I do that, I should probably introduce myself. Hello, my name is Ed Manlove, and I've been a Robot Framework community member for about 12 years now. And for me, it started back with my contributions to the Selenium 2 library, or the then Selenium 2 library. So let me tell you a little bit about how I came into the community. At the time, I was working on an open source project called Plone. Plone is a content management system written in Python. And at the time, the Plone community had come together to discuss how are they going to test the front end. And in that discussion is where I was introduced to Robot Framework. And as a community, we decided to use Robot Framework for our front end testing tool. Now, there was actually an issue between how Plone operated and how the Selenium 2 library was working. It was actually, in that case, it was in the Selenium 2 library. And so as the volunteer who had been working on creating some front-end tests, I went in and looked at the issue and created both a ticket for the issue and also a bug fix for it. At the same time, the current maintainer of the Selenium 2 library was really interested in my work, and he brought in the fix and we fixed the problem. But he was also starting to not use Robot Framework as much, whereas I was starting to use it more and more. So we had a discussion, and essentially he handed over the keys to the Selenium 2 library to me, and that's kind of how I became the maintainer of the Selenium 2 library. That leads us to another set of good questions. How can one contribute, and what makes contributions valuable? So I've talked about this in the past. Is a good place to start thinking about this is a need. So contributing from one's need. And that might sound a little odd, but let me describe that to you. So in our case, with the Plone community, we had a need. We had a problem with the Selenium 2 library where it wasn't working with our build system. And so we contributed a fix. And that's actually how I think a lot of people kind of come into contributing to the community, is by providing having some sort of need. This feature doesn't work for me, or there's an issue with this, or I really like to see this feature. And so that's how I think a lot of people come into the community, is by making a contribution. Now, I think there's a couple of things important to keep in mind there. One is kind of size, and the other one is what I kind of call the place. First, size. And I think it's important to know the size of your contribution isn't really important. It could be a big contribution or it could be a small contribution. Really coming from where you are and coming maybe from that need and providing input. So that's a perfect way of talking about it, right? A contribution can be a need, and just talking about it. Maybe it's providing some code or some documentation. Maybe it's just providing some support and enthusiasm to the project. So that contribution doesn't have to be large. The other one is place. And so contributing to the Robot Framework project doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be contributing into the core, or that you need to contribute into the core. Wherever you find your connection, and maybe that initial connection, that initial need, you can contribute in there. So maybe you're contributing within a library project or somewhere else in the ecosystem. Maybe it is to the core. Maybe you have an issue or like to see a feature or work in a certain way. So contributing in that way. Or maybe it's within your local team or organization and with those people around you. So anywhere that contribution can be made is a good place to kind of come in to be. And that's really what makes contributions important, is by everybody kind of giving into both, actually, and I'll say this, both kind of coming with a need, so kind of taking from the community, but also kind of giving back. By this kind of duality of give and take, what we do is we kind of build this community of mutual reliance almost. And so we have created a community from this. With that, let me ask another question, or another question can get asked. Do I need to be an expert? And do I need to have special skills? I always say to this, the answer is no. And so just as I kind of talk about starting contributing with a need, I start to say contribute with the skills that you have. And let me give you an example from my own story of when I started with the Selenium 2 library. As the maintainer of it, I would always make, one of the interesting things, I'd make contributions to the project, or I'd make changes to the project. And with every change I made out to the project, I always wanted to run that by a second pair of eyes. And I'll say, and I've said this before, with every single contribution that I made, there was always a suggestion from that person that I ran it by of how I might make it a little better. Maybe there was an issue with it, or how could I think about it in a different way. And that second pair of eyes really helped me understand its usage and help make my contributions better. So having a second pair of eyes was helpful. Now you might ask, Ed, if you're just telling us that you as a leader and maintainer of this library needed help yourself, how with my skill set might I do that? I understand. And think about it. I had certain skills that helped me to be able to contribute in there, but I grew my skills. And so that's where we as a community can make a real difference, is we help each other grow in our contributions and grow in our knowledge. And so by working together as a community, what we're really doing is we're building up each other. And so you're learning from me, I'm learning from you. And together as a community, we build up both our community, but we're also building up our individual and collective knowledge. And this is really important. And it's a distinct choice that we make as a community, right? We could be a community that says, no, you need to come in here and you first need to learn all of these different skills before you can contribute. Or, as I suggest, what we do is we make ourselves a community where we're helping each other to grow. And I see that in a lot of different places. Actually, that leads me to my next question. What are the channels for outreach? Before I answer that, as I'm thinking about education, let me give you a good channel for learning. We recently, in the past year, created these guides, and the guides are a set of kind of usable how-to. We have the original user guide, and that's a really great resource, but that's kind of a reference type resource. These new user guides are a practical guide to do a lot of different things. How do I get started? How do I do CI systems? How do I do some documentation and reporting? And so these are some practical guides. Now, let me say and add in here, I will share links to all of these kind of channels so that you can find them easily. But the guides is the first place I start. So talking about some of our channels, the first thing I think of is our Slack channel. And there we have a Slack channel filled with a lot of the members of the community. And there is kind of a real-time chat. I find a lot of people come into the Slack channel when they've got a question and want to have a conversation. And there's also people that kind of come in and maybe they have answers and share. So that's a good spot for us to kind of give and take and have a real-time conversation. We also have the forum, and the forum is a community discussion or a discussion forum on the web that gives us kind of a longer term format. It's also threaded discussions. Some people prefer those over kind of this chat type of areas, but we have both, and both are really useful for sharing information. In addition, we have some social media channels. There's a Facebook group, which I'll admit I don't know much about. There's one social media. We also have an old Twitter account that I think we're still using. And then we have LinkedIn. And so LinkedIn is the kind of the social media channel that I have found over the past few years, and I think it's a really interesting one. There's a lot of people in there. Some questions get asked there. In addition, I find a lot of people and make a lot of connections, old and new connections there. Found a lot of good connections within LinkedIn. So I suggest you check out our LinkedIn channel. So one other kind of channel is our GitHub repositories. Now, the first one I think about is the core repository. So we have where the robot framework code is, and it's out on this in the Robot Framework Foundation GitHub organization. But in addition to that, we have a community organization, and we call it Market Square. Market Square is what we call a place for people to bring out their repositories or projects within GitHub and share them. And it's got three goals. The first one is that goal about sharing. It is kind of this visual, upfront, public place, kind of a common square to meet and share your repositories. The second goal is to help build up teams around those projects. So, for example, we've got the browser library out there, and the core team brings it out there and shares it out with the community. And we've had a lot of different people come in and contribute into it by having it out in the center. In addition, or the third goal for the project is kind of this long-term maintainership and sustainability of projects. So we might have some projects that are being passed along from previous maintainers onto new maintainers. And this is kind of a wonderful mechanism for doing that. Good example of this, and a recent kind of what I call a success, is the database library. The database library was produced by Franz C., and I hope I pronounced his name right, but Franz had built the database library a while ago and had wanted to pass along the maintainership. And so we had some people within the community that wanted to kind of update it and take on the maintainership. And so we've passed that into the community and brought that out. So the GitHub Market Square is a kind of a great resource for everybody out in the community. Thinking back on channels, one other channel that I want to remember and almost don't want you to forget about, and also to think about, is that your local team or your local organization is a great community and a great channel for you. So when we think about the larger community, one of the things that we talk about is that local community. It's not just always out within maybe the Slack community. Sometimes that's what we call maybe internal, part of a smaller part of the community. But that's an important channel because those people are kind of the building blocks. They help us build up, our work, and from there we build up the community. And related to that, a question is, how do we make our local community more active? So for communities just starting off, there are several themes or several ideas that I like to share with them. They are: start small, set expectations, be consistent, and think about the needs. So let me go through those again. Start small, set expectations, be consistent, and think about needs. So starting small means starting simple. To start to build a community, you don't need to start by necessarily hosting a conference, but maybe giving a talk. And that talk doesn't have to be in a large group of strangers, I think giving a talk within your team, or maybe your small part of your organization, that's a wonderful place to start, right? Encouraging one another. And then once you've done that, looking a little bit larger. So having a good place to start is starting small. Next is setting expectations. And this really isn't, I don't say this in a way of saying be realistic or be humble, but setting expectations is about letting those people in your community know what you're going to be doing, setting those expectations. So if I'm going to host a meetup, or maybe write a blog post, start writing a blog post, start a meetup, I'm going to make an announcement. And I might say, I'm going to do this once a quarter. Or maybe I'll say, I'll do it once a month on the first week of the month. But what I'm doing here by kind of describing it, and at my own, I want to say ability or pace, I like the once a quarter because that kind of sets me up small. I'm setting expectations. So people will know, oh, I'll have to come back once a quarter, or I'll come back once a month. And you're really matching their expectations with what you're going to provide for them. The third thing kind of related to that is to be consistent. So once you kind of set those expectations, being consistent is very helpful, because then you can start to build those connections, and almost you're building trust and building up the community. The last thing is focusing on needs, right? That's really what draws people in, is you're focusing on their needs, and you say, well, what are your needs? What are you trying to learn? And by providing a focus on those needs, you really start to draw people in, and then you start to have a larger discussion. So now for communities that are kind of already starting this, and they're starting a little larger, what are some of the things that you can do to make your community more active? And I think of a couple of different things. One is starting to build synergies with other communities, right? So growing, it's about growing. And so what I do is looking out is, where's the other things? So if I'm a company and I've got a meetup, and I have, maybe 2/3 of the people from my internal with the company, looking at what those 1/3 people are doing, right? Helping out them. And maybe you're going to help them build their own small community, and you start to build up larger communities around you. The other thing goes back to the idea of give and take. So, we've talked a lot about a good place for people to start, or where a lot of people start, is in the coming with a need. So I'm kind of taking away from the community. One of the things that you can do to start to build your active community is working with people to kind of help on the giving, right? Having those people give talks. So maybe you are pulling, you had been pulling all the speakers from an internal pool of internal pool of robot framework users, starting to ask your audience to, hey, could you give a talk? What do you think about this? Again, you might be starting small, but making that transition from kind of the give to the take, and that helps to build up the community. So talking about this, what are some events that are planned? First, we have this conference today, and I really do want to thank Nice Project for all the work they've done. I've been super excited last year when they started hosting this online conference, and super excited to see them come back again this year and hosting it, and looking forward to the future with it. Maybe we'll have 15 years of this conference. So I'm super excited about that. And I'm super thankful for all that they've done, and really honored to be here with you. In addition, we've got our annual Robot Framework Conference held in Helsinki coming up this coming February. We've got a few things going on actually during that week. We've got the main conference on the 8th and the 9th. And in addition to that, we're having workshops on the 6th, the Tuesday, and on the 7th, the Wednesday, the day before the conference, we have kind of our community day. And this is actually a really interesting and important part of that week. This is kind of like an unconference where the participants kind of set the schedule. This is a great opportunity for people in the community to kind of work together and meet somebody new and work on a project or have discussions about projects. And it really fits into the larger week of the conference and the needs of both those that kind of put on the conference and also those that come to the conference. And one last thing, this year we're also thinking about and working towards having a cultural activity on the Saturday after the conference. So for those of you who might start to be thinking about the conference, think about that whole week and how you might participate during the whole week. And finally, post-pandemic, one of the things that I've started to see is more and more organizations hosting meetups. So within the Helsinki area, the Robot Framework Foundation is starting up some meetups again, in-person meetups, and also having those online. We in the kind of both here in the United States and up in Canada, and we're looking out for other places in America. We're talking about having our own meetup that kind of fits into that time frame from Brazil, Brazil to California. So East Coast to West Coast on all of the Americas, South America, Central and North America. I want to set expectations on that, so I have to work on that. But we'll be talking more about that in the future. Now, one of the questions was, what was it that made me, take an active part in the community? Why did I want to take an active part in the community? And really kind of balances out to two areas that I think I find in a lot of different people who contribute. It's kind of both on a personal level and a professional level. If I look back at my time with the Robot Framework community, I see, advances both personally or personal joy. I don't know, sure if I call them advances, but professional advances and kind of personal just joy from the community. I started off as a stay-at-home dad, and working with the Selenium 2 library was kind of my time to keep my skills up, and also kind of a chance to have time with other adults. But soon my kids started into full-time school, and my work with the Robot Framework community was really what opened up the door to me getting my first job back from being a stay-at-home dad for about 7 years. And then from there, I got to be a leader, a test automation lead very quickly, and gave a lot back into the organization that I was with. And from there, getting to go to technical conferences and meeting the Selenium core team. And then, my next several jobs were all around Robot Framework. And then a big incentive for me was getting the chance to come to Finland for the first time, for the very first Robocon. The great joy in that, and that experience of that, both professionally, being able to kind of give a talk and present myself and my company to the larger community, but also just the experiences of coming to Helsinki and meeting people in the community. And I get to repeat that, and I've repeated that for several years, and just helps me professionally, but it also just, I enjoy it from a personal standpoint. It's something of a great joy. And so, I encourage everybody to kind of look at that. How is this being a part of the community helping me professionally, and what do I get out of it personally? So looking towards the future, what are some of the topics I'm thinking about? So I've got kind of 4 topics, and here they are, and I'll walk through each of them. So the first one is this: simplify, simplify, simplify versus educate, educate, educate. This is a theme that I've been hearing a fair amount about. low code. So low code is a theme that we hear a lot about. And I kind of place Robot Framework in this kind of scale from low code to full code. It kind of hits all those areas. And I'm not going to talk about that today, but on the low code side, I hear a lot of discussion about how can we make Robot Framework simpler. And I think to a degree it's fairly simple in some areas. And I kind of think, well, should we make it simpler, or can we do something different, which is educate. And I must admit, I'm kind of on the education side. But I also say that listening to this discussion between simplifying or educating, I see the place for simplifying. And I know there's some real key areas within Robot Framework that we can simplify. Providing the error messages back, feedback messages is an area that I think simplifying and also clarifying would greatly help. The database library, some of the things in there and some of our other libraries, how can we simplify the usage of it? Not only maybe educate how to use it, but how do we simplify it? How do we make it easier? And so there's this interesting dynamic that I think a lot about, and will be active, I know, in what I work on over the next year. So the next one is programming language versus natural language. I introduce Robot Framework as a natural language, a generic natural language testing framework. And really like how Robot Framework uses this natural language and the kind of the flexibility with a full natural language. We also have programming syntax within our Robot Framework, and that's important. We're doing test automation, which is a programming exercise, and there's kind of, though, a kind of a bipolar dynamic with these two. And I think it's important for us as a community to kind of have a conversation around this. And we're kind of having a pool on this. And so this is an area of, should we be more natural language? Should we be more programming language? How do we make it, how do we bring those together? What's the conflict there? What's the things that make them work together? And how do we kind of, what focus are we going? What path are we choosing? The next kind of thing that I'm thinking about now and kind of in the future is the second generation of maintainers, of contributors. We, as an open source project, as we started off with, reached our 15th year anniversary of being an open source project. And as you start to look at the long-term sustainability of projects, open source projects, you start to see generational changes over time. And so one of the important things is looking long-term for Robot Framework. How do we mentor our next generation of leaders? How do we grow our next generation of leaders within the community? And that's an important thing. We're kind of at the right time frame to be thinking about that, and thinking about it now. Finally, feedback channels. I would like us to grow our feedback channels. And give an example from the Selenium library. There's a lot of changes that we're making, or really not changes, but more features that we're adding in, and trying to figure out what's the best way to make those feature changes. What's the best way to design those features? We've got a fairly small team, and but we've got an extremely large user base. And so getting feedback from the community on particular areas, particular libraries, or within the core, I think is an important thing that I'd like to work on. And it's something I'm thinking about the future. And one of the things and one of the solutions for this is building people's what I call CI, or continuous integration maturity. That's not making us all experts in continuous integration, but making us and kind of building up everybody's CI maturity so that we can easily test out changes, right? So if I'm making some changes, how can I easily give them to you and you can test them out in your system with your test automation scripts? So building that CI maturity is an area that I'd like to see us as a community kind of grow in. And talking about the Selenium library, question that someone had asked me was, what's happening with the Selenium library? And I just want to give some highlights. 4 things, Selenium 4. So we're adding in some Selenium 4 features into this Selenium library. In addition, and one of those is these kind of wait for conditions. Wait for conditions allow you to wait for a lot of different conditions built in within Selenium. This really will enhance the ability within our Selenium library to do waiting. We've even talked about getting to the point where we might have some built-in, out-of-the-box waiting solutions for the Selenium library. Another exciting new thing with the Selenium library is the Selenium Manager. And this is actually outside of the Selenium library project. This is actually within the core Selenium. The Selenium team has now packaged with Selenium releases what's called the Selenium Manager. And it basically manages the browsers and it manages the drivers for them. And so it can handle all of that. And so it takes that burden of setting up your machine off your hands. Or you can use those tools to easily configure machines before you run your test automation. But it's an important change and something that people should be aware about if you're in the Selenium library world. And one last one is the WebDriver bidirectional. And what this is how Selenium communicates with the browsers. It's a kind of, in the past, it's been, we send out a command, things will happen, we eventually get back a response. With the WebDriver bidirectional change, and this is actually not only the Selenium project, but this is actually the whole W3C specification for WebDriver. What it changes is it makes it more event-driven and gives you a lot more information and a lot more points of control or gathering data from this interaction. And so the WebDriver bidirectional changes are going to make a significant under the hood change to Selenium library. And I'd like to conclude with these questions. What makes Robot Framework community tick? And how has the Robot Framework community grow or evolved over the years? And really, what I want to say here is this participation. This is what makes the community tick. This is how the community grows, is by people contributing, people participating, that give and take, people coming in and sharing their skill sets, working with others. By participating, we all kind of help the community grow. Our participation is really what makes the community happen, what makes the community tick. It's kind of what the heartbeat or the lifeblood of the project is that participation. And I think we can all grow from that. So I want to thank you all for spending this time with me as we looked at our community, maybe how you can contribute to the community, how we can grow the community. And I look forward to meeting you in the future and being part of this larger community. Have a good evening and take care. Bye.